The invitation. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council chamber hummed with ancient power. For 12,000 years, the Council had governed the civilized galaxy with wisdom and precision. 17 species sat in perfect harmony, making decisions that shaped the destiny of trillions. Today they would make their first mistake. Ambassador Zethrin of the Vorith Collective adjusted his ceremonial robes, his 3 eyes scanning the gathered representatives. The Vorith were known throughout the galaxy as the diplomats, the peacekeepers, the architects of compromise. It was Zethrin who had proposed bringing the humans into the fold. "The matter is settled," announced High Chancellor Morvax, her crystalline voice echoing through the chamber. The Quarian leader's translucent form shimmered with authority. "Humanity has demonstrated sufficient technological advancement and cultural stability. We shall extend an invitation to join the Galactic Council as probationary members." Councillor Drakmer of the Kashan Empire clicked his mandibles in what might have been approval or concern. The insectoid warrior's reputation for military prowess was matched only by his caution. "They are a young species. Impulsive. We should observe them longer." "They've had faster-than-light travel for 37 cycles," Zethrin countered smoothly. "They've established colonies on 14 worlds. They've shown remarkable adaptability and innovation. They deserve a voice in galactic affairs." "Innovation," Drakmer repeated, the word sounding like a warning in his chittering speech. "Yes, humans are known for that." The vote was called. 14 in favor, 3 against. It was decided. 3 weeks later the human shuttle arrived. The council chamber fell silent as the massive doors opened. Representatives from species that had outlived entire stellar formations turned to watch. What emerged surprised them all. She was small by galactic standards. No exoskeleton, no natural armor, no obvious sensory enhancements. Just a bipedal primate in a simple black suit, carrying nothing but a data tablet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her brown eyes took in the chamber with unsettling focus. "Honorable council members," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I am Ambassador Kira Vasquez of the United Terran Coalition. Thank you for this opportunity." Zethrin felt a flutter of pride. See. Professional, respectful, well-prepared. His judgment had been sound. "Ambassador Vasquez," High Chancellor Morvax intoned. "Welcome to the Galactic Council. As a probationary member, you will observe our proceedings and offer input when called upon. Today we address a matter of commerce. The Trilaxian Trade Consortium has requested expanded mining rights in the Kepler Belt region." Kira listened as Councillor Venmus of the Trilaxians made his case. The slug-like being oozed confidence as he spoke of economic efficiency and technological superiority. The proposed mining operation would strip mine 17 asteroids in a resource-rich belt that happened to border 3 different territorial claims. "The operation will generate substantial revenue for the Council Treasury," Venmus concluded. "The affected parties will be fairly compensated according to standard protocols." "Standard protocols meaning 10% of gross revenue," Kira said quietly. Every eye, lens and sensory organ in the chamber turned toward her. "I apologize," she said, not sounding apologetic at all. "I was told I could offer input." "You may speak, Ambassador," Morvax said, her tone carefully neutral. "I've reviewed the standard protocols. The compensation structure was established 4,000 years ago when extraction technology was significantly less efficient. Modern mining operations extract 47 times more resources per operation than the historical baseline. Shouldn't the compensation reflect current realities?" Silence. Councillor Venmus's eye stalks quivered. "The protocols have served us well for millennia." "I'm sure they have," Kira replied. "Especially for those doing the mining." Zethrin felt his diplomatic instincts screaming. This was not how probationary members behaved. One did not question established protocols in one's first session. "Ambassador Vasquez," he interjected smoothly, "perhaps we should discuss the nuances of council procedure before." "The human raises a valid point," Drakmer interrupted. The Kashan warrior leaned forward, mandibles clicking with interest. "I had not considered the technological advancement disparity." "Because it's never been questioned," Venmus said, his tone hardening. "These protocols represent the consensus of centuries." "Consensus," Kira repeated. She tapped her tablet. "I've analyzed the last 300 years of council votes. 83% of resource extraction rights went to 3 species, Trilaxians, Vorith, and Quarians. These 3 species also happen to control 67% of council committee assignments. Is this consensus or is this monopoly?" The chamber erupted. Some species demanded order. Others demanded explanations. Councillor Venmis demanded that the human be censured for impudence. High Chancellor Morvax raised her crystalline arms and gradually silence returned. This session is concluded, Morvax declared. We will reconvene tomorrow. As the council dispersed, Zethrin approached Kira. His 3 eyes conveyed different emotions: confusion, concern, and something he didn't want to acknowledge as admiration. That was unwise, Ambassador, he said softly. Kira met his gaze without flinching. Was it untrue? Truth and wisdom are not always the same thing in diplomacy. Then perhaps, Kira said, diplomacy needs to evolve. She walked away, leaving Zethrin alone in the emptying chamber. He had championed humanity's inclusion in the council. He had assured everyone that humans would adapt to their ways, that they would learn the subtle art of galactic politics. For the first time, Zethrin wondered if he had made a mistake. What he didn't know was that the mistake wasn't inviting a human to the council. The mistake was assuming she would play by their rules. The disruption. The next morning, Ambassador Kira Vasquez arrived at the council chamber to find half the delegates already gathered in tight clusters, their conversations hushed but heated. She could feel the weight of their attention as she entered. Zethrin approached quickly, his normally composed demeanor showing cracks. Ambassador, we need to talk. Good morning to you too, Counselor, Kira replied pleasantly. You've caused quite a stir. Councillor Venmis has filed a formal complaint. Several others are calling for your probationary status to be revoked. Kira nodded as if this was expected. And the others? Zethrin hesitated. What others? The ones who aren't complaining. What are they saying? Before Zethrin could answer, a new voice interrupted. They're saying you're either very brave or very stupid. Councillor Drakmer approached, his massive insectoid frame somehow moving with grace. I haven't decided which yet. Can't it be both? Kira asked. Drakmer's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. I like this human, Zethrin. She has spine. She has a death wish, Zethrin muttered. Ambassador Vasquez, you must understand. The council operates on tradition, on established procedures. You cannot simply question whether those procedures are fair? Kira finished. Actually, Counselor, I think I can. That's rather the point of having different species on the council, isn't it? Different perspectives. Different perspectives delivered with appropriate diplomatic courtesy, Zethrin stressed. I was perfectly courteous, Kira said. I simply asked questions about publicly available data. You accused the council leadership of corruption, Zethrin hissed. I pointed out a statistical pattern. If that pattern suggests corruption, perhaps the problem isn't my observation. The chamber chimed, signaling the start of the session. As delegates took their seats, Kira noticed the arrangement had changed. Several species who had been neutral yesterday now sat closer to those who'd supported Venmis. Battle lines were forming. High Chancellor Morvax called the session to order. Her crystalline form seemed somehow harder today, more faceted and less translucent. Before we proceed, Morvax began, we must address yesterday's disruption. Ambassador Vasquez, you have been accused of violating council decorum and making unfounded accusations against established members. How do you respond? Kira stood. The chamber fell silent. High Chancellor, I made no accusations. I presented data. If council members feel accused by objective information, I would suggest the problem lies not with the data but with their own actions. You implied corruption, Venmis spat. I implied nothing. I stated facts. If those facts make you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why. This is outrageous. Another counselor rose, a being from the Xyloth hierarchy. We do not tolerate such disrespect from probationary members. Then perhaps you shouldn't have probationary members, Kira said calmly. If you want my species to simply agree with everything the council decides, what's the point of our membership? You already have enough yes-men. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Zethrin closed his eyes. This was worse than he'd feared. But then Drakmer laughed. It was a chittering, clicking sound that somehow conveyed genuine amusement. She's right, you know. When was the last time anyone actually debated in this chamber? We've become so focused on consensus that we've forgotten how to disagree productively. Counselor Drakmer, Morvax said, a warning in her tone. No, let me finish. The Kashin warrior stood to his full imposing height. I've sat on this council for 200 cycles. In that time, how many decisions have been truly contested? How many times have we genuinely challenged each other's proposals? We've become comfortable. Lazy even. This is not the Kashin way of debate through combat, another counselor protested. We are civilized beings. Civilized doesn't mean passive, Drakmer countered. The human is doing what we should all do, questioning, analyzing, demanding accountability. The human is causing chaos, Venmus said. Kira spoke again. I've caused discussion. There's a difference. Yesterday, I raised concerns about mining compensation. Today, I'd like to present an alternative proposal. She tapped her tablet, and a holographic display materialized above the chamber floor. Numbers, charts, and projections filled the air in glowing lines of data. I spent last night running calculations, Kira explained. If we adjust the compensation structure to reflect current technology, not my numbers but based on the Council's own technological assessment reports, the affected parties would receive 34% of gross revenue instead of 10%. This still leaves the mining companies with substantial profit margins while providing fair compensation. 34% is absurd, Venmus protested. Is it? Your own financial disclosures show profit margins of 78% on current operations. Even at 34% compensation, you'd still clear 40% profit. That's hardly bankruptcy. Those disclosures are supposed to be confidential to Council leadership, Morvac said sharply. They're filed with the Council registry, Kira replied. Which I have access to as a Council member, even a probationary one. Everything I've cited is from official Council documents. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was different. Some delegates were outraged, yes, but others were nodding, whispering, calculating. Kira had done something unprecedented. She'd actually read the documentation. Councillor Yatris of the Meridian Confluence, who had been silent until now, rose slowly. The energy beings form pulsed with thought. The human's analysis is sound. I would like to hear more about this alternative proposal. As would I, said another delegate, then another. Morvax looked around the chamber, her crystalline features unreadable. Finally she spoke. Very well. We will take a recess to review Ambassador Vasquez's proposal. This session is adjourned until this afternoon. As delegates filed out, Zethrin approached Kira again. This time his expression was different, less concerned, more curious. How did you do all that analysis in one night? He asked. Kira smiled. I didn't. I did it before I ever arrived at the Council. You planned this. I prepared for this. There's a difference. I knew that as a new member, especially from a young species, I'd face resistance. So I armed myself with the one thing that transcends politics: data. You've made powerful enemies, Zethrin warned. I've also made allies, whether they realize it yet or not. Kira gestured to the departing delegates. Half of them have been voting with the majority for so long they've forgotten they could do otherwise. I just reminded them. Drakmer joined them, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. You're dangerous, human. You make people think. Thank you, Kira said. That wasn't necessarily a compliment, Drakmer replied, but there was approval in his tone. Come. Let me show you something. He led Kira and Zethrin through a side passage to an observation deck overlooking the Council's administrative complex. Thousands of beings worked in the structures below, processing the endless bureaucracy of galactic governance. Do you see that? Drakmer pointed to a massive building at the complex's center. That's the archive of precedents. Every Council decision for 12,000 years, all stored and catalogued. It's our foundation, our guide. And your prison, Kira said softly. Drakmer's mandibles stilled. Explain. You're so bound by precedent that you can't adapt. The galaxy changes, technology advances, species evolve, but the Council remains frozen in procedures established millennia ago. You're not governing the present. You're managing a museum. Silence hung between them. Then Drakmer spoke, his voice thoughtful. My people have a saying, the blade that never bends will eventually break. Perhaps the Council has been rigid too long. Perhaps, Zethrin added quietly, the human is exactly what we need. Kira looked at both of them. Or perhaps I'm exactly what you feared I'd be. Someone who won't simply accept that this is how things have always been done. Those might be the same thing, Drakmer observed. As they returned to the chamber for the afternoon session, Kira felt the weight of attention shift. Some delegates still viewed her with hostility, but others now watched with interest, even anticipation. She had disrupted their comfortable equilibrium. The question now was whether the Council would break under the pressure or finally evolve. Either way, Kira Vasquez had no intention of backing down. The mistake of inviting a human to the Council wasn't just about one person. It was about introducing change to a system that had forgotten how to change. And change, as the council was about to learn, could not be controlled, only embraced or resisted. The Alliance. The afternoon session began with an unusual energy. Delegates who typically arrived precisely on time had come early. Quiet conversations filled the chamber with a buzz that hadn't existed in decades. Kira noticed that seating arrangements had shifted again. Some species had deliberately moved closer to where she sat. High Chancellor Morvax's crystalline form seemed dimmer, as if the morning's chaos had somehow drained her. We reconvened to discuss Ambassador Vasquez's alternative compensation proposal. Councillor Venmis, you have requested to speak first. The Trilaxian oozed forward, his eye stalks rigid with barely contained anger. High Chancellor, I must protest this entire proceeding. Ambassador Vasquez has been on this council for exactly 2 days, yet she presumes to restructure agreements that have governed galactic commerce for 4,000 years. This is not only presumptuous, it's dangerous. Dangerous to whom? Kira asked. To galactic stability, Venmis shot back. These protocols exist for a reason. They've maintained peace and prosperity across 17 species. Your reckless proposal would upend centuries of economic balance. Would it upend the balance, or would it upend your profit margins? Kira stood, her data tablet in hand. Let me share something else I found in those public records. Over the past century, resource extraction under current protocols has generated 847 trillion galactic credits in revenue. 68% of that revenue went to just 3 species, while 14 species received less than 20% combined. She pulled up another holographic display. The numbers glowed in the air like accusations. That's economic efficiency, Venmis argued. The species with the most advanced technology naturally extract the most resources. Except that's not what the data shows, Kira countered. The Varian Republic has extraction technology rated at 92% efficiency compared to Trilaxian's 95%, a negligible difference. Yet Trilaxian operations receive 8 times more extraction permits. Why? Silence. Councillor Lysara of the Varian Republic rose slowly. The reptilian diplomat's scales shimmered with surprise and dawning anger. I would also like to know why, Councillor Venmis. Committee assignments are based on numerous factors, Venmis said stiffly. Which committee makes those assignments? Kira asked, though she clearly already knew the answer. The Economic Oversight Committee, Morvax said quietly. And who chairs that committee? I do, Venmis admitted. Along with representatives from the Vorith and Quarian delegations, Kira added. The same 3 species who control the majority of extraction rights. That's not efficiency, Councillor Venmis. That's a closed system designed to benefit those already in power. The chamber erupted. This time the chaos was different. Species who had been silent for years were suddenly vocal, comparing notes, pulling up their own records, discovering patterns they'd never noticed, or never wanted to notice. Councillor Lysara's voice cut through the noise. The Varian Republic seconds Ambassador Vasquez's proposal. Furthermore, we call for a full audit of committee assignments and resource allocations over the past century. Seconded, Drakmer added immediately. And thirsted, another voice called out, Councillor Fen of the Ixtar Collective, a crystalline being who had rarely spoken in council sessions. Venmis looked around the chamber, eye stalks swiveling in barely concealed panic. High Chancellor, this is unprecedented. You cannot allow. Cannot allow what? Morvax interrupted. Her voice was sharp, clearer than before. Cannot allow the council to examine its own practices? Cannot allow probationary members to participate meaningfully? Or cannot allow questions that might challenge comfortable arrangements? The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the High Chancellor. I have led this council for 300 cycles, Morvax continued. I believed we had achieved a stable, peaceful system. But Ambassador Vasquez has shown me something I should have seen myself. Stability without justice is simply stagnation wearing a prettier name. She turned to Kira. Your proposal will be put to a vote. But first, I want to hear from other council members. Not just about this specific issue, but about what else we might be overlooking. What followed was unprecedented in council history. For the next 4 hours, delegates rose one after another, voicing concerns they'd suppressed for years, sometimes centuries. Trade routes that mysteriously favored certain species. Technology sharing agreements that never seemed to benefit smaller civilizations. Cultural exchange programs that had become little more than tourism for the wealthy. Zethrin listened with growing discomfort. As a Vorith, his people had benefited from the current system. He'd never questioned whether that benefit was earned or simply inherited. During a brief recess, he found himself alone with Kira in one of the side chambers. "You planned all of this," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I prepared for possibilities," Kira corrected. "I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but I knew the data would speak for itself once people actually looked at it. You've destabilized the Council. I've started a conversation the Council should have had centuries ago." She turned to face him directly. "Counselor Zethrin, why did you really want humanity on the Council?" He hesitated. "Your species showed promise. Adaptability, innovation. That's the official answer. What's the real one?" Zethrin's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep thought among the Vorath. Finally he spoke. "Because I was bored. Because for 200 years I've sat in that chamber watching the same patterns repeat, the same comfortable decisions made, the same species benefit while others simply endure. I thought a young species might bring energy, perspective. I didn't expect revolution." Kira offered with a slight smile. "I was going to say honesty, but yes, perhaps revolution too." "They're often the same thing," Kira said. "Honesty about uncomfortable truths is revolutionary in systems built on comfortable lies." Before Zethrin could respond, Drakmer entered the chamber. "Ambassador Vasquez, there are several delegates who wish to speak with you privately. They're forming what they're calling a reform caucus." "How many?" Kira asked. 8 species so far. Maybe more soon." Zethrin felt a chill. "A voting bloc? That's exactly what the current power structure does," Drakmer finished. "They're just being more transparent about it." Over the next hour, Kira met with representatives from smaller council members, species who had felt marginalized but never organized, never believed change was possible. The Varyon Republic, the Ixtar Collective, the Meridian Confluence, and 5 others. Together they represented 9 votes, not enough to control the council but enough to force real debate. "What do you want?" Councillor Lysara asked Kira directly. "What is your goal in all this?" "Fairness," Kira replied simply. "Not dominance, not advantage for humanity, just a system where decisions are based on merit and necessity, not on who's held power the longest." "That's idealistic," Fen observed, their crystalline form chiming softly. "Is it? Or is it just basic decency?" "In galactic politics," Lysara said with a reptilian smile, "those are often the same thing." When the session reconvened, the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. What had been a comfortable autocracy of the established powers was now a genuine debate among competing interests. The vote on Kira's compensation proposal was called. The chamber fell silent as each delegate's decision was recorded. 14 in favor. 5 against. Kira's proposal had passed. But more than that, something had broken open in the council, or perhaps something had finally been built. For the first time in living memory, there was genuine opposition, genuine debate, genuine democracy. As delegates filed out, Venmus slithered past Kira, his eye stalks rigid. "You've won a battle, human. But you've made enemies who will not forget." "Good," Kira replied. "I wasn't trying to make friends. I was trying to make things fair." Later, in her quarters, Kira composed her first report back to Earth. The Terran Coalition needed to know what was happening, what they'd stepped into. "The Galactic Council is not what we were told," she wrote. "It's not a unified body working toward common good. It's a bureaucracy that's ossified over millennia, where power protects power and tradition strangles innovation. But it's also full of good people who've simply forgotten how to push back against the status quo. We're not conquerors here. We're catalysts. Every question we ask, every assumption we challenge, every pattern we expose, these are all forcing the Council to confront what it's become versus what it claims to be." They invited a human to the Council. They thought they were being generous, inclusive, progressive. What they didn't realize is that humans don't accept, "This is how it's always been," as a reason to keep doing something. Their mistake wasn't inviting us. Their mistake was thinking we'd be grateful enough to stay quiet. "I won't be." She sent the report and stood at her window, looking out at the vast complex of the Council. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new opportunities to push for change. The real work was just beginning. The backlash. The attack came 3 days later. Not physical, the Council had maintained peace for millennia. But politics could be just as brutal as any weapon, and the old guard had finally organized their response. Kira arrived at the morning session to find the chamber rearranged. The seating had been restructured, placing her isolated in a corner position, separated from the Reform Caucus members. A symbolic gesture but an unmistakable one. High Chancellor Morvax called the session to order with unusual formality. Today we address a motion brought by Councillor Venmis and supported by 5 other delegates. They are calling for a formal review of Ambassador Vasquez's conduct and credentials. Kira had expected this. On what grounds? Venmis oozed forward, his body language radiating triumph. On the grounds that humanity, as a species, lacks the maturity and cultural development necessary for council membership. Your behavior over the past week has demonstrated exactly why probationary periods exist. Interesting timing, Kira observed. This concern about human maturity only emerged after we passed the compensation reform. This concern, a new voice interjected, exists among many council members. Councillor Thane of the Archon Sovereignty spoke for the first time in the debate. The Archons were an ancient species, their civilization spanning back before most others had achieved spaceflight. Thane's words carried weight simply by virtue of his people's longevity. The Archon Sovereignty has observed humanity for several centuries. You are a species prone to conflict, to emotional decision-making, to rapid and often destructive change. Those are interesting criticisms, Kira replied, coming from a species whose own historical records show 14 major civil wars and 3 planetary extinction events before you achieved stable governance. Thane's features hardened. Ancient history. 5,000 years ago, Kira said. Which I'm sure feels ancient to you. But it proves my point, species can evolve, can mature, can learn from mistakes. Or do you believe the Archons of 5,000 years ago were fundamentally different beings than you are now? This is precisely the problem, Venmis cut in. You don't show proper respect for your elders in this council. I show respect for wisdom, Kira countered. Age and wisdom aren't always the same thing. The chamber filled with murmurs, some approving, many shocked. One simply did not speak to the Archons that way. Ambassador Vasquez, Morvax said, and there was something careful in her tone, perhaps you should consider that diplomacy requires more than being right. It requires building relationships, understanding cultural contexts, respecting established hierarchies. With respect, High Chancellor, I've read the Council Charter. Nowhere does it say that respect for hierarchies is a requirement for membership. It does say that all member species have equal voice and equal standing. Equal standing, yes, Thane said. But wisdom comes with experience. Humanity has been in space for less than a standard galactic generation. You've barely left your own star system. How can you presume to guide galactic policy? Kira pulled up her tablet. Let me share some data on recent human achievements. In the 37 years since we achieved FTL travel, humanity has established 14 colonies, developed 17 new technologies that have been adopted by other species, peacefully negotiated treaties with 4 alien civilizations we encountered, and contributed 127 million person-hours of labor to joint galactic projects. She expanded the holographic display. By comparison, in their first 37 years after Council admission, the Trilaxians established 6 colonies and developed 2 new technologies. The Vorath established 8 colonies and developed 5 technologies. Humanity isn't just keeping pace, we're exceeding the historical standard. Quantity is not quality, Venmis argued. Then let's talk quality, Kira shot back. 3 of those human-developed technologies are now Council standard for environmental systems. Our medical exchange program has reduced mortality rates in frontier colonies by 18%. Our cultural database has been accessed by every Council species for educational purposes. You're cherry-picking data, another counselor objected. I'm presenting facts, which is apparently cherry-picking when those facts are inconvenient. Councillor Lasara rose from her seat. If I may speak? The Varian Republic has worked with human colonists for the past decade. We have found them to be creative problem solvers, quick learners, and surprisingly adaptable to different cultural contexts. This motion seems less about human competency and more about discomfort with having those competencies used to examine council practices. Seconded, Drakmer said. I find it suspicious that human maturity only became questionable after they questioned our maturity. Councillor Drakmer, Thane said sharply, you would side with this child species against your fellow council members? I side with truth, Drakmer replied. Something this council has been uncomfortable with for too long. The debate raged for hours. The old guard argued about tradition, respect, the need for gradual change. The Reform Caucus countered with data, precedent, and pointed questions about why change needed to be gradual when the current system was demonstrably unfair. During a recess, Zethrin pulled Kira aside. You're pushing too hard. Even your allies are getting nervous.
Am I?
Kira asked. Or are they nervous because they're finally taking a stand and realizing there are consequences? There are always consequences to challenging power, Zethrin said. The question is whether you're prepared for them. Are you trying to warn me or threaten me? Neither, Zethrin said quietly. I'm trying to help you. You've accomplished remarkable things in just a week, but you're making enemies faster than you're making allies. Even Morvax is wavering. The High Chancellor voted for the reform. She voted for fairness. That doesn't mean she's comfortable with how you're achieving it. There's a difference between wanting change and wanting chaos. Kira was quiet for a moment. Do you think I'm wrong? I think you're right about almost everything, Zethrin admitted. But being right isn't enough in politics. You need people to want to follow you, not just acknowledge that your data is accurate. Then what should I do? Show them you're not just here to tear down their system. Show them what you want to build instead. When the session reconvened, Kira requested permission to speak. The chamber quieted, waiting for her response to the motion against her. Counselors, she began, I've listened to the concerns raised today. I understand that my approach has been direct. Some might say confrontational. But I want to clarify something that I think has been lost in this debate. She paused, making eye contact with delegates across the chamber. I'm not here to destroy the Galactic Council. I'm here because I believe in what the Council could be. Should be. You've built something remarkable, 17 species coexisting peacefully, making collective decisions, working toward common goals. That's extraordinary. My own species hasn't always managed peace among our own people, let alone with others. She saw some delegates nodding. But something went wrong along the way. This council stopped being a forum for debate and became a rubber stamp for predetermined decisions. It stopped asking, is this right? And started asking only, is this how we've always done it? That's not because any of you are bad people or bad leaders. It's because systems, over time, optimize for their own preservation rather than their original purpose. What are you proposing? Morvax asked. I propose we establish a council reform commission. Not to tear down the existing structure, but to examine it systematically. Representatives from every species, equal voice for all. We review policies, protocols, and procedures. We identify what works and what doesn't. We make recommendations for changes that preserve the council's strengths while addressing its weaknesses. The chamber was silent. And I propose, Kira continued, that this commission be led by someone respected by all sides of this debate. Someone with centuries of experience, unquestioned integrity, and a genuine desire to see the council succeed. She turned to face the High Chancellor directly. I propose that High Chancellor Morvax chair this commission. Morvax's crystalline form seemed to pulse with surprise. Around the chamber, delegates whispered urgently. This is a transparent attempt to, Venmus began. To what? Kira interrupted. To put one of the council's most respected leaders in charge of examining our own systems? To ensure that any reforms are guided by wisdom and experience? If you oppose this, Councillor Venmus, I have to wonder why. Venmus's eye stalks quivered, but he said nothing. Ambassador Vasquez, Morvax said slowly, this is most unexpected. But not unwelcome? Kira asked. Not unwelcome, Morvax admitted. Though I would need to consider whether I'm the right person for such a task. You are, Councillor Lasara said immediately. If the human is willing to submit her reform ideas to your judgment, that demonstrates good faith. And it prevents her from simply ramming through changes without proper consideration, Drakmer added, though there was amusement in his tone. A clever political move, Ambassador. It's not politics, Kira said. It's genuine. I don't want to break the council. I want to help fix it. But I can't do that alone and I shouldn't. This needs to be a collective effort, guided by those who understand the council's history and purpose better than I ever could. The vote on the motion to review her credentials was postponed. Instead, a new vote was called, Establishment of the Council Reform Commission, chaired by High Chancellor Morvax. 15 in favor. 4 against. As delegates departed, Kira felt the atmosphere shift once more. The hostility hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something else, cautious hope. Zethrin approached her, his 3 eyes showing what might have been respect. That was masterfully done. That was honest, Kira corrected. I meant every word. I know, Zethrin said. That's what made it masterful. As Kira returned to her quarters that evening, she allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. The past week had been brutal. Every session a battle, every word weighed and measured, every action scrutinized by dozens of species with their own agendas. But she'd accomplished something. Not just for humanity but for the Council itself. The question now was whether the old guard would accept reform, or whether they'd find new ways to resist. Either way, Kira Vasquez wasn't backing down. The mistake of inviting a human to the Galactic Council was becoming clearer every day. They'd invited someone who actually cared about making it work. The Commission. The Council Reform Commission held its first meeting in a chamber that hadn't been used in centuries. Unlike the Grand Council Hall with its soaring ceilings and crystalline architecture, this room was practical, almost intimate. A circular table allowed all participants to see each other as equals. High Chancellor Morvax had selected the Commission members carefully. Representatives from all 17 species, including both supporters and opponents of reform. Kira sat between Councillor Lasara and a relatively quiet delegate named Fun from the Karath Assembly. "Before we begin," Morvax announced, her crystalline voice filling the chamber, "I want to establish ground rules. This commission exists to examine our systems honestly. That means we park our egos and our politics at the door. We are not here to defend what we've done, but to evaluate whether we should continue doing it." "Easy to say," Venmis muttered from across the table. "And necessary to say," Morvax replied sharply. "Councillor Venmis, you opposed this commission's creation. Yet you volunteered to serve on it. Why?" Venmis's eye stalks swiveled uncomfortably. "To ensure that any changes are reasonable and measured." "Meaning you want to slow down or stop reforms?" Drakmer observed. "Meaning I want to prevent reckless changes that could destabilize galactic governance?" Venmis shot back. "Then we share a goal," Kira interjected. "Nobody here wants destabilization. We want improvement." "Your definition of improvement seems to involve appending 1,000-year-old protocols," Thane said coldly. "Only the ones that don't work anymore," Kira replied. "Some protocols are outdated. Others are fine. Our job is to tell the difference." Morvax raised a crystalline hand. "Councillor Thane, Ambassador Vasquez, both of you make valid points. That's exactly why we need systematic review rather than emotional reaction. Now shall we begin?" The first week of commission meetings was grueling. They examined everything: voting procedures, committee assignments, resource allocation, technology sharing, dispute resolution, cultural exchange programs. Every system was dissected, analyzed, questioned. Kira came prepared with data for every session. But she learned to present it differently, not as accusations but as questions. Not as proof of corruption but as opportunities for improvement. Slowly, even the skeptics began engaging genuinely. "I never realized the technology sharing protocols favored species with certain biological characteristics," Finn admitted during one session. "The Karath have struggled to benefit from shared technologies because they're designed for oxygen-breathing species. We just accepted it." "That's not acceptable," Lasara said immediately. "If we share technology, it should be adaptable to all member species." "The cost of adaptation is significant," Venmis argued. But this time his tone was less defensive, more practical. "What if we established an adaptation fund?" Kira suggested. "Species who contribute technologies receive compensation, but part of that compensation is earmarked for making the tech accessible to all council members." "That could work," Finn said thoughtfully. Even Thane nodded slowly. "It addresses a legitimate concern without requiring massive restructuring." This became the pattern. Identify problems, discuss solutions, find compromises that satisfied multiple interests. It was slower than Kira's initial confrontational approach, but it was building something more sustainable. Genuine consensus rather than forced votes. But not everyone was happy with the progress. 3 weeks into the commission's work, Kira received an anonymous message on her personal comm device. The text was simple and chilling: "You're making enemies who won't forgive. Watch your back." She reported it to Council Security, but there was little they could do with an untraceable message. Still, Kira found herself more cautious, more aware of her surroundings. The threat came not from shadows but from the council floor itself. During a routine session, Venmis introduced a surprise motion. "I propose that all commission recommendations require unanimous approval before being presented to the full council." Kira's blood ran cold. Unanimous approval meant any single member could veto any reform. It would kill the entire process. "That's absurd," Drakmer protested. "You'd give veto power to any resistant member." "I'd ensure that changes have true consensus," Venmis countered. "Isn't that the point of the commission?" Several delegates who'd been wavering on reform suddenly looked interested. Unanimity sounded reasonable, even democratic. It sounds good, Kira admitted, standing to address the council. But it's a poison pill. True unanimity is impossible in any diverse group. There will always be someone who benefits from the status quo and refuses change. This motion would transform the Commission from a reform body into a preservation society. Or it would ensure we don't make hasty mistakes, Thane added, supporting Venmus. The debate raged. Kira presented data on historical unanimous vote requirements in various galactic organizations. Nearly all had resulted in institutional paralysis. But data couldn't compete with the emotional appeal of consensus. During a recess, Zethrin approached her urgently. You're losing this vote. Too many delegates are seduced by the idea of unanimity. I know, Kira said. I need to change the frame of the debate. How? By asking what they're really afraid of. When the session resumed, Kira requested to speak. I want to address the underlying concern here. Many of you fear that this commission will be used to force through changes that harm your interests. That's a legitimate fear. But consider what unanimous approval would mean. She pulled up a holographic display showing the commission membership. We have 17 species represented. That means the Trilaxians have veto power. The Archons have veto power. The Vorith, Quarians, Kashin. Everyone has veto power. But here's what else it means. The smallest species, the newest members, the ones with the least political influence, they also have veto power. She highlighted several names. The Karath Assembly. The Meridian Confluence. The Ixtar Collective. Under unanimous approval, they could block any proposal that maintains current inequalities. Is that really what the old guard wants? True veto power for everyone? The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this implication. She's right, Lysara said slowly. Unanimous approval cuts both ways. It would prevent reforms, yes. But it would also prevent any future changes that benefit the current power structure. Venmus's eye stalks quivered as he realized his mistake. By trying to give himself veto power, he'd also given it to his opponents. I propose a modification, Morvax interjected smoothly. Commission recommendations require 2/3 approval, sufficient to ensure broad consensus, but not allowing individual vetoes. And any species can request a full council debate on any recommendation before final implementation. It was a masterful compromise. Strong enough to allow progress, balanced enough to protect against radical changes, transparent enough to satisfy concerns about oversight. The vote was called. The modified proposal passed 16-3. After the session, Venmus slithered past Kira, his tone bitter. You turned my own weapon against me. I turned your weapon into a tool, Kira corrected. There's a difference. That evening, the Reform Caucus gathered informally in Lysara's quarters, something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Different species, different interests, but united by a common goal. We're actually making progress, Finn said, sounding almost surprised. Real, substantive progress. It's slower than I wanted, Kira admitted. But it's more sustainable. You've learned, Drakmar observed. When you first arrived, you were all fire and challenge. Now you're learning to build. I had good teachers, Kira said, glancing at Zethrin. The Vorith diplomat's 3 eyes showed embarrassment and pride in equal measure. I didn't teach you anything you didn't already know. I just helped you see that revolution and diplomacy don't have to be opposites. Speaking of which, Lysara said, I've been analyzing the data from our commission work. If we maintain current momentum, we could present our first package of reforms to the full council within 2 months. What reforms? Kira asked. The Adaptation Fund for Technology Sharing, revised compensation structures for resource extraction, reformed committee assignment processes, and transparency requirements for all council financial dealings. That's ambitious, Kira said. That's necessary, Lysara corrected. And it's achievable because we're not presenting it as human reforms or Reform Caucus reforms. We're presenting it as commission reforms, backed by the High Chancellor herself. Kira felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Hope. Not just that change was possible, but that it was actually happening. But she also remembered the anonymous threat. Someone out there wasn't happy with progress. Someone saw reform as a threat worth fighting against. The question was who, and what they were willing to do about it. As the informal gathering ended and delegates returned to their quarters, Kira stood at her window overlooking the council complex. Somewhere in those buildings, someone was planning how to stop what they'd started. The mistake of inviting a human to the council had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. They hadn't just invited a disruptor, they'd catalyzed a movement. And movements once started are very difficult to stop. The sabotage. The attack came during the Commission's final review session. They'd been working for 6 weeks straight, hammering out the details of their reform package. The atmosphere had shifted from adversarial to collaborative. Even Venmus had contributed constructive suggestions, perhaps realizing that some change was inevitable and it was better to shape it than fight it. Kira was presenting the final data analysis when her tablet suddenly went dark. Then every holographic display in the chamber flickered and died. The lights remained on, but all electronic systems went offline simultaneously. Technical malfunction, Morvax said calmly. Security, please investigate. But Kira's instincts screamed otherwise. This isn't a malfunction. Check the Commission files, now. Council technicians rushed in, connecting manual interfaces to the chamber's systems. What they found made Kira's blood run cold. The Commission's data archives have been corrupted, a technician reported. 6 weeks of analysis, calculations, drafted proposals, all gone. The files still exist, but they've been scrambled. Random data inserted, conclusions altered, recommendations changed. Changed how? Morvax demanded. The technician pulled up a damaged file on a portable unit. For example, the resource compensation reform originally recommended 34%. The corrupted version says 3%, even less than current protocols. The Technology Sharing Adaptation Fund has been changed to require species to pay for adaptations themselves. It's like someone took every reform and twisted it into something worse than the status quo. The Commission members stared in shock. This is sabotage, Drachmer said flatly. Someone deliberately destroyed our work. Not destroyed, Kira corrected, her mind racing. Corrupted. They want to discredit the reforms by making them look unreasonable or malicious. If we present these corrupted recommendations to the Council, we'll lose all credibility. Can the files be restored? Lasara asked. The technician shook his head. The corruption is sophisticated. It would take months to sort legitimate data from inserted false information. We don't have months, Finn said quietly. The full Council vote is scheduled for next week. Silence fell over the chamber. 6 weeks of work, countless hours of debate and compromise, all potentially wasted. We could postpone, Thane suggested. Though he'd initially opposed reforms, even he looked disturbed by this sabotage. No, Kira said firmly. That's exactly what whoever did this wants. Delay, demoralization, eventually abandonment of the whole effort. Then what do you propose? Morvax asked. We can't present corrupted data. We don't present data, Kira said. We present testimony. She stood, ideas forming rapidly. Every member of this commission has spent 6 weeks analyzing these systems. We know what we found, what we recommended, and why. We don't need files to tell that story, we can tell it ourselves. Personal testimony is less compelling than objective data, Venmus pointed out. Usually yes, Kira agreed. But in this case, the sabotage itself proves our point. Someone is so threatened by these reforms that they committed a serious crime to stop them. That tells the Council everything they need to know about whether change is necessary. Drachmer's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. She's right. This attack is an admission. No one sabotages a system that's working fairly. But we still need to prove what our actual recommendations were, Lasara said. Otherwise, it's just our word against the corrupted files. Kira smiled slightly. Actually, we have backup. Everyone turned to look at her. I've been sending daily reports to the Terran Coalition throughout this process, she explained. Standard diplomatic practice, keeping my government informed. Those reports contain summaries of every commission discussion, every recommendation we debated, every conclusion we reached. They're stored on Earth's secure servers, completely outside the Council's systems. That's brilliant, Finn breathed. That's paranoid human thinking, Drachmer said approvingly. It's standard protocol, Kira corrected. Every species here does the same with their home governments, right? The looks she received suggested that most hadn't bothered. Council proceedings had always been secure enough not to require external backups. So we have the data, Morvax said. But we still need to identify who did this. I have theories, Kira said quietly. Council security investigators spent the next 3 days analyzing the sabotage. The attack had been sophisticated, using advanced techniques to mask its origin. But sophistication could be its own signature. The corruption code uses Trilaxian computational architecture, the chief investigator reported to an emergency council session. Specifically, the type used in high-level economic modeling systems. All eyes turned to Venmus. "This is outrageous," the Trilaxian protested. "Are you suggesting I sabotage the commission I served on?" "The evidence suggests someone with access to Trilaxian systems," the investigator said carefully. "Not necessarily you personally. But someone in your delegation," Drachmer said. "Someone who reports to you." "I deny any involvement," Venmus declared. "If someone in my delegation acted independently, I will cooperate fully with the investigation." Kira watched him carefully. His eye stalks showed genuine shock and anger. Either he was telling the truth, or he was an excellent actor. Over the next 2 days, investigators traced the attack to a junior member of the Trilaxian economic team. Under questioning, the individual claimed to have acted alone, believing the reforms would destroy galactic economic stability. "Do you believe that?" Zethrin asked Kira privately. "No," she said. "Junior staffers don't have the access or skills for something this sophisticated. Someone higher up was involved, but they're using this individual as a fall guy." "Can you prove it?" "Not without causing a major diplomatic incident," Kira admitted. "And honestly, it might not matter. Whether Venmus ordered this or just created an environment where someone felt empowered to do it, the result is the same. The old guard is desperate enough to sabotage democratic reform. What will you do? Present our case anyway. Let the council decide." The day of the full council vote arrived. The chamber was packed with not just delegates but observers, staff, even media representatives from various species. Word had spread about the sabotage and everyone wanted to see what would happen. High Chancellor Morvax called the session to order. "We gather today to consider the Reform Commission's recommendations. However, recent events have complicated our proceedings. Ambassador Vasquez, you requested to address the council first." Kira stood. She'd spent days preparing this moment, but now that it had arrived, she felt surprisingly calm. "Counselors," she began, "6 weeks ago this commission began examining our systems. We didn't approach this work as enemies or rivals. We approached it as colleagues who shared a common goal, making the Galactic Council the best it could be." She paused, looking around the chamber. "We found problems. Not because anyone is evil or corrupt, but because systems age, because what worked 1,000 years ago doesn't always work today, because power, left unchecked, tends to concentrate rather than distribute." Holoprojections appeared above the chamber floor, the data from her Earth backups, carefully organized and presented. "We recommended reforms. Fair compensation for resource extraction. Adaptable technology sharing. Transparent committee assignments. Nothing radical, nothing revolutionary, just updates to make our systems work for all member species, not just some." The projections shifted to show the corrupted files. "Someone didn't want these reforms presented to you. Someone sabotaged our work, twisted our recommendations, tried to make progress look like regression. They failed. But their attempt tells us something crucial." She leaned forward, voice growing stronger. "This sabotage proves that reform is necessary. No one attacks a fair system. No one commits crimes to protect justice. The very fact that someone felt threatened enough to do this shows how desperately we need change." The chamber was absolutely silent. "So I'm not asking you to trust data that could be questioned," Kira continued. "I'm asking you to trust the 17 members of the Reform Commission, representing all of you, your interests, your concerns. We've spent 6 weeks working together. We've debated, compromised, and built something that serves everyone." She nodded to Morvax, who stood gracefully. "The Commission unanimously approved these recommendations," the High Chancellor said. "Not because Ambassador Vasquez forced us, not because any single species dominated the process, but because these reforms are right. They're fair. They're necessary." One by one, other Commission members stood. Even Thane. Even Venmus, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "We stand together," Councillor Lasara declared. "All 17 species. That should tell you everything you need to know about whether these reforms deserve your support." The debate that followed was heated but different from before. The sabotage had changed something fundamental. It had made the abstract concrete, made the theoretical personal. Seeing actual corruption had convinced wavering delegates that reform wasn't just idealistic, it was necessary. When the vote was finally called, Kira held her breath. The results appeared on the central display: 16 in favor, 3 against. The reforms had passed. The chamber erupted in applause from some quarters, angry murmurs from others, but overwhelmingly, there was a sense that something significant had shifted. As delegates filed out, Drachmer approached Kira with something that looked almost like respect. "You won, human. Against sabotage, Against centuries of tradition, against species who've been playing this game since before your world discovered fire. You won. We won, Kira corrected. Every species on that commission, every delegate who voted for change, they won too. Modesty doesn't suit you, Drakmer said with a clicking laugh. It's not modesty. It's fact. One human couldn't have done this alone. It took all of us. Later that evening, Kira found herself alone with Zethrin in one of the observation lounges overlooking the council complex. I owe you an apology, the Vorith diplomat said quietly. For what? For thinking you were the mistake. When I championed humanity's admission to the council, I thought you'd adapt to our ways. I thought you'd learn to think like we do. Instead, you taught us to think differently. And you think that's a good thing? I think it's necessary, Zethrin said. We were dying, Kira. Oh, not literally. The council could have continued for centuries more, making the same decisions, preserving the same hierarchies. But we'd stopped growing, stopped questioning, stopped evolving. You reminded us what that feels like. At considerable cost to your comfort, Kira observed. The best things usually cost something, Zethrin replied. Besides, comfort is overrated. Progress is better. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the lights of the complex twinkle below. What happens now? Zethrin asked. Now the real work begins, Kira said. Passing reforms is one thing. Implementing them, making sure they actually change things, preventing them from being watered down or circumvented, that's the hard part. You sound like you've done this before. Human history is full of reforms that looked good on paper but failed in practice, Kira said. We've learned to be suspicious of victory. Real change requires constant vigilance. That sounds exhausting. It is, Kira admitted. But it's worth it. As they turned to leave, Kira's comm device chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it and smiled. What is it? Zethrin asked. Message from Earth. They're sending 3 more diplomatic representatives to the council. Looks like humanity is settling in for the long term. More humans, Zethrin said with a mixture of amusement and trepidation. The council will never be the same. That's the idea, Kira replied. The mistake of inviting a human to the Galactic Council had transformed from a diplomatic miscalculation into something far more profound. They'd invited change itself, wrapped in human skin, armed with human stubbornness and human unwillingness to accept. That's how it's always been, as an answer. The sabotage had failed. The reforms had passed. But the real test was just beginning. Because changing laws is easy. Changing cultures? That takes generations. Lucky for the council, humans were patient when it mattered. And Kira Vasquez had only just begun. The legacy. 6 months after the reforms passed, Ambassador Kira Vasquez stood in the same council chamber where she'd first caused chaos. But everything had changed. The seating arrangement had been reorganized, no longer hierarchical by seniority, but rotating to ensure different species sat together each session. Committee assignments were now posted publicly and audited quarterly. Resource extraction bids were reviewed by randomly selected panels to prevent favoritism. Small changes perhaps. But small changes had a way of becoming something larger. The council recognizes Ambassador Chin of the Terran Coalition, High Chancellor Morvax announced. Marcus Chin, one of the 3 new human representatives, stood to present humanity's proposal for a joint scientific research initiative. Unlike Kira's confrontational early days, his presentation was measured, collaborative, building on existing council frameworks rather than challenging them. Kira watched from her seat with satisfaction. She taught the new human delegates everything she'd learned, not just about council politics but about when to push and when to build consensus, when to challenge and when to compromise. The proposal passed with minimal debate. 14 in favor, 4 abstaining, none opposed. After the session, Kira found herself approached by Councillor Venmis, something that would have been unthinkable months ago. Ambassador Vasquez, the Trilaxian said, his tone carefully neutral. I wanted to inform you that the Trilaxian Consortium will be partnering with 3 smaller species on our next resource extraction project, per the new cooperative guidelines. That's good to hear, Counselor, Kira said, genuinely surprised. Don't mistake this for friendship, Venmis said sharply. You've cost my people considerable revenue. I've cost you unfair advantages, Kira corrected gently. There's a difference. Perhaps. Venmis's eye stalks quivered in what might have been grudging acceptance. But I will admit, the new system is more stable. We lost short-term profits, but we've gained long-term partnerships. The species we're working with now were our competitors before. Now they're our allies. That has value. He slithered away before Kira could respond, but she smiled anyway. Even reluctant acceptance was progress. "He's right, you know," a familiar voice said. Counselor Drakmer had approached silently, as was his nature. "The economic data from the past 6 months shows increased overall productivity. When more species benefit from extraction rights, they invest more in supporting infrastructure. Everyone prospers." "Basic economics," Kira said. "Broad prosperity beats concentrated wealth. I'm glad the data is bearing that out." "As am I," Drakmer admitted. "Though I'll never admit publicly that a human taught us something our own economists should have realized centuries ago." "Your secret is safe with me," Kira said with a laugh. That evening, the Reform Caucus held what had become a regular gathering. What had started as a political alliance had evolved into something more: genuine friendships across species lines. "I have news," Counselor Lysara announced, her reptilian features showing excitement. "The Varaion Republic has received 3 applications from other species wanting to establish joint colonies on our frontier worlds. Before the reforms, no one wanted to partner with us. We weren't considered influential enough." "That's wonderful," Finn said enthusiastically. The Korath delegate had become more confident over the months, speaking up regularly in sessions. The Korath Assembly has seen similar interest. "It's like the entire galactic dynamic has shifted." "It has," Zethrin confirmed. "The diplomatic channels are more active than they've been in decades. Species who never spoke to each other are now negotiating treaties, partnerships, exchanges. The Council was supposed to facilitate this, but we'd become too rigid. The reforms removed barriers we didn't even realize we'd built." "Not all the changes have been smooth," Counselor Fenn cautioned. Their crystalline form chimed softly. "The Ixtar Collective reports resistance from some traditional factions. They view the reforms as erosion of established order." "There's always resistance to change," Kira acknowledged. "The question is whether we let that resistance stop progress or whether we address legitimate concerns while continuing to move forward." "Spoken like a true diplomat," Zethrin said with approval. "You've come a long way from the confrontational human who stood up in her first session and challenged millennium-old protocols." "I've learned from excellent teachers," Kira replied. "But I haven't stopped challenging things. I've just gotten better at picking my battles." "Speaking of battles," Drakmer interjected, "there's a matter coming up next session that will interest you. The Archon Sovereignty has proposed new protocols for admitting additional species to the Council." Kira's eyes sharpened. "Expanding membership? That could be significant." "It could also be a way to dilute the Reform Caucus's influence," Lysara warned. "If they admit species aligned with the old guard, they could shift the balance back. Or," Finn suggested, "it could be an opportunity to bring in fresh perspectives that continue pushing for progress." "That's the gamble," Zethrin said. "And it will require careful navigation." The conversation continued late into the evening, these representatives from different species with different interests united by a common belief that the Council could be better than it was. Weeks later, Kira received a private message from High Chancellor Morvax, requesting a personal meeting. She arrived at Morvax's office uncertain what to expect. The High Chancellor's quarters were surprisingly simple for someone of her position, elegant but not ostentatious, filled with artifacts from various Council species but arranged thoughtfully rather than displayed as trophies. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador," Morvax said. "Please sit." Kira settled into a chair adapted for human physiology. "How can I help you, High Chancellor?" "I want to discuss something I haven't spoken about publicly," Morvax began. "When you first arrived at the Council, I was conflicted. Part of me admired your boldness. Part of me was deeply concerned about the disruption you caused." "And now?" Kira asked. "Now I'm grateful," Morvax said simply. "I've served on this Council for 300 cycles. I believed I was leading well, maintaining stability, preserving peace. But you showed me I'd confused stability with stagnation." She moved to the window, her crystalline form catching the light. "The Quarians have a concept: crystal fatigue. Over time, even the strongest crystals can develop invisible fractures from constant stress. They remain functional, even beautiful, but they're gradually weakening. The Council had crystal fatigue. We looked strong, but we were becoming brittle." "And the reforms?" Kira prompted. "The reforms created controlled stress fractures, breaking the crystal in planned ways so it could be restructured into something stronger." Morvax turned back to face her. "You gave us permission to admit we weren't perfect. That was the gift." "It didn't feel like a gift at the time," Kira said wryly. "The best gifts rarely do," Morvax replied with what might have been a smile. But I didn't ask you here just to thank you. I have a proposal. She pulled up a holographic display showing council organizational charts. I'm creating a new position, Special Advisor for Institutional Development. The role would be to continuously evaluate council systems, identify inefficiencies or inequities and propose improvements. It would report directly to me and have access to all council data and proceedings. Kira's eyes widened. You want to institutionalize reform. I want to ensure that what you started doesn't end when you eventually return to Earth, Morvax said. Change can't depend on one person or one species. It needs to be built into our systems. And I'd like you to design how this position should function. That's ambitious, Kira said. You've taught me that ambition isn't a flaw, Morvax replied. Will you help? Kira thought about it. She could refuse, maintain her role as an outsider pushing against the system. But wasn't this what she'd wanted? Real, lasting institutional change? I'll help, she said. On one condition. What condition? The position rotates among species every 5 years. No one species should have permanent control over reform initiatives. Morvax's crystalline features brightened. Of course. You're still thinking about preventing concentrated power. Always, Kira confirmed. Over the following months, they worked together to design the new positions framework, consulting with delegates across the political spectrum. Even former opponents like Venmus contributed suggestions, recognizing that institutional oversight could prevent future disruptions by catching problems before they required dramatic intervention. When the proposal was presented to the full council, it passed unanimously. A year after her arrival, Kira stood before the council one more time. The Terran coalition was rotating her position. She'd returned to Earth for reassignment, with Marcus Chin taking over as senior human representative. I want to thank this council, Kira said, her voice echoing through the chamber that had become familiar over these months. For something that wasn't easy, you listened. You didn't have to. You could have dismissed me as an upstart from a young species. You could have blocked every reform, protected every tradition, maintained every comfort. But you didn't. She looked around at faces that had become colleagues, even friends. You chose to grow instead of ossify. You chose progress over comfort. You chose to be better rather than simply be comfortable. That's not easy for individuals, and it's even harder for institutions. But you did it. We had excellent motivation, Councillor Drachmer said from his seat. You were incredibly annoying. Laughter rippled through the chamber, something that had been rare a year ago and was now common. True, Kira acknowledged with a smile. But I was annoying in service of something important. And you recognized that even when you hated it. That's wisdom. High Chancellor Morvax rose. Ambassador Vasquez, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to express our gratitude. You came here as a probationary member and leave as one of the most influential figures in modern council history. Your legacy is not just the reforms you pushed for, but the example you set. You showed us that questions are not threats, that challenge can be constructive, that change is not our enemy. She paused. In recognition of your service, the Council has voted to grant humanity full membership status, effective immediately. No more probationary period. You've earned your place at this table. The chamber erupted in applause. Kira felt tears sting her eyes, something she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said softly. For all of us. After the ceremony, Zethrin walked with her to her shuttle. Do you remember, he said, when I told you that I'd made a mistake championing humanity's inclusion? I remember, Kira said. I was right, Zethrin continued. But not in the way I thought. The mistake wasn't that you would disrupt our systems. The mistake was that I thought disruption was a bad thing. He extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell that had become common among council members. Thank you, Kira Vasquez, for reminding us how to be uncomfortable, how to grow, how to be better. Kira shook his hand. Thank you for being willing to listen, even when you didn't want to. As her shuttle lifted away from the council complex, Kira looked down at the sprawling structure below. A year ago, it had been an intimidating monument to ancient power. Now it looked like what it was, a workplace full of imperfect beings trying to do better. They had invited a human to the Galactic Council. It had been their mistake. But it had been the best mistake they'd ever made. Because sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is admitting you need to change. And sometimes change comes from the most unexpected sources. From young species who haven't learned that some questions aren't supposed to be asked, who haven't accepted that tradition is an answer rather than an excuse. The Galactic Council would never be perfect. No institution ever is. but it was better than it had been. And because of what Kira had started, what all of them had built together, it would keep getting better. One uncomfortable question at a time. One reform at a time. One choice at a time, to be honest rather than comfortable, to be fair rather than convenient, to be just rather than simply traditional. As Earth appeared in the viewport, growing larger as the shuttle approached home, Kira smiled. Her work on the council was done. But humanity's work there? That was just beginning. And she couldn't wait to see what came next.